Over the last 2 decades, advances in brain research have confirmed the theories that cis men and cis women's brains are structured differently. However, there is still a lot of research required to be done to determine how a transgender person's brains are constructed. There has been a number of research, and in this episode of Stacy Links Presents, I'm going to show you some research on a comparison between transgender person's brains and cis person's brains, and how our brains relate to cisgender brains. I'll be right back. So welcome to my channel. I'm Stacy, and in this episode of Stacy Links Presents, I want to talk about the male and female brain, research and discoveries that have been done, and how it relates to transgender people's brain construction. Male brains and female brains of cisgender people are built quite a bit differently, and I'm going to go into some detail into discoveries that have been made. Plus, I'm going to show you an article from the Cleavland Clinic that talks about research that's been done to compare the brains of transgender people with that of the cisgender counterparts we identify as. So before I start, what I'll get you to do, if you're new to this channel and you're a transgender person interested in fashion, makeup, and jewelry, make sure you go down below in this video and hit that subscribe button. And make sure you click that little bell to be notified 30 minutes before each of my vlog premieres and anytime I upload other content to my channel. I have many playlists with videos on my makeup routines, fashion, jewelry, and product reviews you would love to see. Plus, I'm documenting my transition as a single parent and advocating for the LGBTQIA+ community. Also, be sure you're following me on social media. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and on TikTok. Check the description below in this video for all my social media links. So for the start of this episode, I just want to talk about some discoveries that have been made in the way of brain science. They have discovered through MRI scans that cis men and cis women's brains are structured very differently. Many portions of the brains of men or women are larger or smaller than the other. They've also discovered that there is a difference in hormone receptors between cis men and cis women. However, research into how trans people's brains are structured is still preliminary. There are a number of theories regarding trans people. One of the biggest differences between cis men and cis women's brains is, I mentioned before, hormone receptors. They discovered that men's brains have more testosterone receptors than estrogen receptors, and women's brains have more estrogen receptors than testosterone receptors. In some of the preliminary research that they're finding, they're seeing that our brains are structured more like the cisgender counterparts we identify as, including neural pathways, synaptic centers, as well as hormone receptor distribution. Alright, so now I'm going to bring up this article from the Cleavland Clinic, Research on the Transgender Brain, What You Should Know. Now, this was published in 2019, so there have probably been a number of new discoveries since then. What's going on in your brain plays a large role in determining the gender you identify with, and researchers working with transgender people are just starting to understand how. So, they are just in preliminary research to find out exactly how our brains work compared to cisgender folks. Being transgender has nothing to do with sexual identity. As one doctor puts it, sexuality is about who you're attracted to, gender is about who you are. So gender and sexuality are completely separate, and generally are for many of us. Where does gender originate? In the birthing process, a medical professional will declare your baby a boy or a girl based on their sexual organs. But does this determine their gender? We're trying to change the understanding of gender, says psychiatrist Urat Altani, MD. That's one of my big goals. The main question I'm asking is, where is the gender? We know that as an embryo forms, the genitalia specializes into either male or female. But what about development in the brain? The brain and the body can go in different directions, Dr. Altany says. Gender is not only in our genitalia. There is something in the brain that determines gender. Male, female, and transgender brains. The male and female brain have structural differences, he says. Men and women tend to have different volumes in certain areas of the brain. When we look at the transgender brain, we see that the brain resembles the gender that the person identifies as. Dr. Altany says, for example, a person who was born with a penis but ends up identifying as a female often actually has some of the structural characteristics of a female brain. And the brain similarities aren't only structural. We're also finding some functional similarities between the transgender brain and its identified gender, Dr. Altany says. In studies that use MRIs to take images of the brain as people perform tasks, the brain activity of transgender people tends to look like that of the gender they identify with. Research in these areas is extremely limited and more research needs to be done to find conclusive results, Dr. Altany notes. But we're already seeing definite trends. So it looks like the research that they've been conducting is going in the direction that is showing consistency amongst trans people. Although these differences in brain structure and functionality are important markers for gender determination, it isn't always as simple as male or female. Some research shows the brains of transgender people are somewhere in between, sharing characteristics of both male and female brains, Dr. Altany says. This is consistent with the growing understanding that gender exists on a spectrum, with people identifying not only as male or female, but also as genderqueer, gender fluid, or non-binary. These terms refer to gender identities that incorporate a variety of gender characteristics. This part of the article goes into talking about understanding gender dysphoria. They believe the more research they do into how the brain determines gender, they'll be able to better identify gender dysphoria and better treat it. They'll be able to create better treatments. There is one theory about why certain trans people can only go on certain levels of the hormone that they get prescribed. For example, an M to F person can't increase their estrogen above a certain level because it causes more dysphoria. But being at that lower level is just fine. So there are things like that they're still wanting to look into. So with the research being done right now, some takeaway questions would be, what causes a trans person to be born the way we are? Why do we have these structural differences in our brain? What in our DNA or in our genes causes this sort of thing? And these are types of research that they still have yet to do. And also, why is it that trans people's brains are built the way they are in relation to our genitalia? Over the course of time, we will discover more and more things about trans people, and especially non-binary, because that's an area where they really don't understand much at all. So as time goes on, we will hear more and more about advances in research in the transgender brain. Alright, so thanks for watching. Make sure you smash that thumbs up button down below, and make sure you drop a comment. And if you have any questions about the information, or if you have anything that you can add to it, make sure you drop your comment below. And stay tuned for my next episode. I'll see you then. Bye!